An explorer in 1866 described this area of desert in the Never Never lands of Central Australia. For many years, the arid conditions, where the temperature in the sun often soars to over 150 degrees, deterred many a would-be settler. But in 1939, Elliot Price, grandson of a London policeman, came to this region with his family to take over the ex-camel breeding station called Malurana.
Malurana means plenty of tucker in the Aborigines' language, but when we first got here, we found that the camels, which had been used for carting equipment for sinking water holes on the Birdsville track, had eaten the country right out, leaving the place in very poor heart. Water was our number one problem before we could bring in sheep. But being an ex-boer and contractor myself, I knew how and where to drill for water. Our water comes up hot enough to boil an egg, but it's too salty for crop irrigation, although the stock drink it all right. Then we had to dig a hell of a long channel from the borehole to get the water to the dried-up river foam and make it flow again through 18 miles of our 1,000 square miles of property. That'd give us a frontage for watering the stock in either direction, but stock can't live on salt water alone. As far as feed for the sheep and cattle is concerned, we're entirely dependent on the summer and winter rains. We had 7 dry seasons to start off with. Then, like the Bible, 7 good years from 1950 onwards. And with the money we made, we built the homestead up to what it is today. We have 6 large homes on the station. The big house is for me and the wife. There's one for our daughter Hazel and her family, and one for our other daughter Lorna and her family, another for our son Keith and his family, and 2 for the workers. But it was very different when Mum and me first arrived. The walls of the old house were so rotten you could stick your fist through anywhere, and, well, you could shake hands with someone on the other side. There were snakes everywhere. Yes, you should just hear our daughter Hazel on that subject.
You'd go to get a saucepan to put the potatoes in, lift the lid, and there'd be a snake curled up inside. You'd go, ah! Grab your gun, shoot it, and then you get on with the cooking.
I have so many grandchildren now, and what with the workers' children as well, I decided to build our own schoolhouse at Malurana.
There's 8 of the children go to school. The teacher comes from Adelaide. We've had about 4 in the last 3 years. They all like it for 12 months or so. And after that, the loneliness of the outback seems to get them down.
I'm managing director of Malurana Limited and run the thing as a whole. Keith, my son, is responsible for all the mechanics after the vehicles and water pumps and lighting plants. And my son-in-law, Blue Hughes, looks after the office work, building and welding. And the other son-in-law, Bill Mitchell, he's the head stockman.
6,000 sheep and 100 head of cattle. That's all we've got at the moment. But in 1950-51, after the big flood, there was so much feed that we got up to 18,000 sheep and ran 1,500 cattle as well. With wool worth a pound, that gave us a pretty tidy income.
Drought. 7 years of it we've had now. Haven't had a decent summer rain since 1956. The dust storms keep wiping out what little feed does come up and burying the pens and troughs. And by the beginning of 1963, things were in such a bad way with more and more overdraft and the sheep dying off left, right and centre, that all the stock apart from the breeding ewes and a few cattle had to be sold off. Then, just when our spirits were at their lowest, suddenly out of the blue we got this telegram asking, would Lake Ayre, well, that's on the edge of our property and 35 miles from Malurana, be suitable to race on for a speed attempt? Then it went on to say that BP were looking for a suitable salt lake on which Donald... Actually speaking, it was Warren Benithan, a chemical engineer, who put them onto it. Ever since 1950, he'd made a special study of the lake, and he told us it was first discovered in 1840, and that millions of years ago, it used to be a great inland sea, which gradually dried out, leaving over 3,000 square miles of dry salt. Well, we'd always thought it was a useless, lonely, dangerous sort of place, and we were surprised to hear how hard and level and beautiful the salt surface in the middle was, because, well, we'd only mucked around on the edges of the lake, which were all boggy. So to get the Bluebird onto the dry salt, the first thing they had to do was to build a causeway. They heard all that was in surveying of the course on Madigan Gulf, the part of the lake they'd chosen as being the driest and levelest. But when I saw the arrival on April the 14th of the Bluebird car in its box with all the other vehicles, I thought, oh, with things being in such a bad way at Malurina with the drought, I thought the opportunity to make a little extra be housing the Bluebird people and feeding them and helping them generally. We treat everybody alike when they come to Malurina. Out here, the first thing we do is to make them welcome and feel at home. The Campbells fitted in real nice, but they got the same treatment as anybody else. No better, no worse. And you can't afford to waste time on frills in the outback. Putting up all the people working on the project, well, there are about 150 of them at one time, could have been a bit of a headache. But I'm not the sort of character that lets headaches occur. We put up most of the Campbell people in our homes, set up spare beds on the verandas. Or we put them in caravans or in the shearers' quarters. We built them a large mess hall, but apart from that, all we did was put in a few extra showers and toilets.
In the old days, the toilets used to work on a system known as the Big Drop. Just a hole in the backyard with a shed over it. You just hoped that the wind blew in the right direction. Oh, but that's all changed now.
I've always been associated with a lot of people all my life, and I was very happy to have Mr. Campbell and his team at Malurina, and I helped him with a speed attempt. In spite of all the gear and equipment they brought with them, Mr. Campbell asked me if we had anything that would haul Bluebird out to the lake. Now, that was quite a question. And then I remembered our old Blitz lorry.
The Blitz was bought in Adelaide in 1954 for about 250 quid. She was in pretty good nick then. Good motor. Brakes are a bit crook, though. All it's done since is carted posts and firewood out of the creek till we started modifying it for this job. I reckon it'll be a bit of an honor for the old girl, helping him to get ready for the attempt.
At times, such as when the Bluebird team technicians arrived out from England, our airstrip seemed as busy as Adelaide Airport. At least the flies always give everyone a very warm welcome. They're quite the friendliest things about Malurina. They become so attached to the Bluebird people that they even followed them out to the lake. But out here, they were in dead strife. One of the 14-ton graders, which had been smoothing the track, had broken through the salt surface. Well, about 4.5 inches thick there. But only quick action rescued it from vanishing into a grey, evil-smelling, bottomless ooze.
On April the 24th, the Blitz was ready to take Bluebird out to the lake.
We
Started all right, got about a mile from the homestead, and then the old blitz just stopped. Naturally, I felt a hell of a fool when Mr. Campbell had to get an army wrecker to tow us. I'd been quite a while about how good the old girl was.
On account of the breakdown, it was dusk when the blitz arrived at the lake. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried back in a semi-trailer, but believe me, there were so many so-called experts who wanted to have a go at the blinking thing, and it didn't matter who tried it, they were all as bad as each other. Yeah, it took us about an hour and a half to get it backed in and the Bluebird unloaded. Luckily, they were still messing about putting the finishing touches to the 15-mile-long track, so we weren't the last off the lake. They'd called the track the Benithan Run on account of all the advice Warren Benithan had given them. Everything looked real good for the test next day, so we all set off back to Malorna. Every day after work, the Bluebird team would get together for a drink. In this hot country, every man's entitled to have a drink before his evening meal. And you know, it was a wonderful opportunity to get to know the boys. That evening, we were all very excited about Bluebird going to make a first trial run the next morning. But next day, Lake Ayre really was a lake. Half an inch of rain had fallen overnight. It meant that the trial had to be postponed. They certainly couldn't race the car.
Luckily, a south wind was blowing which pushed all the water north. And 3 or 4 days afterwards, we started preparing a new track called Hobson's Choice. As the salt was damp and soft, a steel girder drag was all that was needed to level off the bumps and whatnots.
Well, by 1st of May, everything was ready again for Mr. Campbell and his Bluebird. The pressmen and all the people from Malorna were there to watch as Bluebird was got ready for its first trial run in Australia. We were very proud to have helped in preparing for this moment. Actually, the Bluebird started up very sweet and everything ran very nice. Even though there was a hell of a mirage that day, it looked to me as if there was no trouble at all as she accelerated away.
I thought it looked real beaut, but it didn't seem to be doing any real speed. I felt I could do better in my own car. Maybe if you could see it going past something, you'd get some sense of speed. But it didn't look any faster than an ordinary motor car going along.
It wasn't what I thought it'd be. I expected a hell of a roar and she'd be gone. But then I remembered that it was the first trial run and Mr. Campbell had to take it easy before he could really put his foot down.
Naturally, the children couldn't talk of anything else. They had to get the flipper out, which I'd made for them earlier. It's got an old water pump engine and an Austin 7 gearbox. Well, and the seats are from an old aeroplane. They set out to break every record they could think of. Luck certainly seemed to be against the Bluebird people, for it rained again after only 2 more runs. The funny thing was that at Malorna, there wasn't even enough rain to lay the dust. At this stage, we learned of a far greater threat to the attempt. Floods from the Cooper and Diamantina rivers were sweeping down from Queensland. They were expected to totally flood the lake in under a month's time. Anyhow, this little rain only hung them up a few days, and then they were off again.
bluebird people coming to Mallurin definitely upset our usual routine. All those beds to make, the food to be brought in from Adelaide 500 miles away. All the cooking and extra housework, we never stopped. Always had to be thinking what next all the time. Normally, I cut the boys' hair out here. You know, it's nearly 100 miles to the nearest barber. But that bluebird team, why, I was practically running a business.
Even though we'd only got a few thousand sheep at Mallurin, because of this here drought, bluebird or no bluebird, there was a heck of a lot of work that Bill Mitchell and the workers had to keep up with.
130 miles of dingo fence to look after and keep repaired. If we don't keep an eye on it, the kangaroos get in and strip off what feed there is. Then there's about 180 traps to be kept set and baited all the time, so that any dingoes straying onto the property are caught before they can kill any of our sheep. 8 water pumps at various points on the property that have to be kept working. And God knows how many troughs to be cleaned out and kept full with water. There's also about 40 miles of pipe main leading from the bores, which have to be inspected once a week and checked for leaks. But in the end, there was a hell of a panic to get the track ready for the record attempt. So I had to go out on the measured mile to help the surveyor chap from Adelaide, taking sights, marking up and so forth.
All this time, the bluebird speed was being worked up. In my candid opinion, it looks as if it'd only be a week or so before Mr. Campbell pulled off the attempt. Every day after the runs, they'd fly up north in an Australian Air Force top end of the lake, 90 miles away, where the rivers, carrying the floods from Queensland, flow in. Using our flying doctor radio, we called up our neighbours, the Oldfields, at Eat a Dinner, about 60 miles away, to ask them how things were up there, where the Cooper River crosses the Birdsville Track.
Everything's going pretty good, Jim. Very good. Mr. Campbell is very anxious to know about down there and how long it's likely to be before it reaches Eat a Dinner, and also the Birdsville Track. And back to you, Jim.
It should hit the Birdsville Track in about 4 weeks. I'll give you more details when we come over to see the Lorrae Desmond show. Hey now, Lex.
We were very thrilled when we heard that Mrs. Campbell had arranged for her friend Lorrae Desmond to come up to Mallurin. We thought she was a wonderful entertainer.
It was a marvellous little act she put on. It helped lift our spirits a lot, and together with the good news about the floods being delayed, boosted our morale no end. The next day, after having reached a higher speed so far, 240 miles an hour, made in spite of high winds and wet track, the Bluebird team were feeling very excited. Then, that afternoon, a hell of a storm struck the lake. A storm like I'd never seen before in winter months. In the interest of safety, Mr. Campbell decided to get all unnecessary personnel, including his womenfolk, off the lake and back to Mallurin as quickly as possible.
That fleecy-looking sky could mean rain. You can actually smell rain when it gets close as it comes in on the wind.
On account of the bad forecast, Mr. Campbell decided to get the Bluebird off the lake too as quickly as possible in case it was marooned by floods. He certainly wasn't taking any chances.
I thought Mr. Campbell was crazy at the time, not using the blitz. I reckon that Bluebird's narrow wheels would be sure to go through on the thin salt leading to the causeway. But he knew more than I did, it seems.
And then, by crikey, it really did rain. Oh, it was beautiful rain. Extra good. There's no doubt about it, when it rains at Lorrae, it was the most interesting time as far as us people is concerned. We're very excited about rains. Every inch of rain that falls means at least 1,000 pounds in our pockets. Then the river started running, and this time the lake was really flooded. Later that day, Mr. Campbell called us all together and told us the sad news that the attempt had been called off. It was all very disappointing. We felt terrible. Then he ended by saying, this is not the end of a story, but rather the end of a chapter. We shall be back. And then his people started to pack up. This last rain is how you get the makings of good feed. The first 2 falls of rain that held up the attempt temporarily didn't do much good for us. It was his last beautiful follow-on rain, the one that washed the attempt out. That's the one that did all the good. That gives us our good solid sheep and cattle feed. After 7 years of drought, rain like that turns earth as hard as concrete into a carpet of flowers and lush herbage almost overnight.
After the rains, the roos come in great mobs to get at the feed. Sometimes you see them in hundreds. 6 years ago, we shot 7,000 in 12 months. It's the same with all the other animals. You don't see any at all during the drought, then all of a sudden, at the first sign of feed, they're all over the damn place.
Naturally, we were sorry to see the Bluebird people moving out when they'd tried so hard to get the attempt in, but once we were positively sure that the feed was there, and, well, it didn't matter if it didn't rain for another 12 months, then we ordered more sheep and cattle.
1,500 ewes and 75 rams. That's what we bought. These, plus our increase in lambs from our original stock, should bring us up to 10 or 11,000 head by this time next year.
You know, the sheep were dying in droves when Campbell first come here in April. But look at them now, will you? We've got some of the fattest I've ever seen. As a matter of fact, they're too fat to waddle. They're too fat to be good for themselves. Yeah, that's how good the feed is.
Well, 6 months have passed now and shearing's over. We've had a very good clip, good wool, got a very good price for it. At the moment, we're about to draft the sheep. You know, separate the young ewes from the rams so that they don't get the lamb too young. They're just coming out of the drought into a good year. Early summer rain's what we want now. With any luck, we should have a good dropping of lambs next year. Yeah, it's real good to be back in business again.
We bought an aeroplane mainly because the boss had wanted a plane for years. She'll be used for looking at our water supplies, stock spotting, cattle buying, and wherever else we wanted to go. We can do as much work in one day by plane as you can do in 4 or 5 normally.
You know, they said I was mad to buy the plane, like they said I was mad to come to Lorrae in the first place. But it's the crazy ideas I've had that have made it better than before. I know the rain washed out Mr. Campbell's attempt. We were all very sorry, but, well, it was certainly wonderful to see our property come good again after the long drought and all that worry. Maybe now you'll realize what rain means to us. Well, mind you, we haven't had any since, so you'd better come back to Lorrae. Now, joking aside, we'll be glad to see him again. And Bluebird, it certainly livens up the old homestead a bit.